Hey everybody, so I've got another book review to do. And it feels funny like saying book review to these books that are, I feel like kind of above my pay grade in a sense. But but I wanted to talk about this book because I thought it was great, and it was something that I'd always wanted to read. And if you're an equestrian, you should read it. And if you're an equestrian and you've probably heard of it. I mean, I'd heard of this book for forever, and that is The Art of Horsemanship by Xenophon. And Xenophon was an ancient Greek horseman, and this is the earliest known book that we have on how to train and buy and care for horses. And I had never read it. I knew of the book, but I hadn't read it before, and I hadn't actually seen it before, and I didn't realize it was so thin. It literally took me if I'd sat and read it just straight through, it probably would have taken me less than an hour. But I went through and looked at the footnotes and stuff too, and paused here and there. But it's just, what I loved about it is caring for horses hasn't changed a ton since this book. And he talks about just being kind and the differences in different horses, and training a very high-spirited horse versus a sluggish horse, how to find the right horse for you. And generally he's talking about horses for war purposes, but a lot of the concepts are pretty much the same. And it talks about actually how to it also talks about caring for horses, keeping their hooves good, in good repair, I suppose. And I loved when he talked about the duties of the groom, and how the groom should teach the horse how to handle itself in certain situations, as opposed to just forcing it to do things. Which is a very, we think of that as kind of a modern concept, but it really isn't. I mean, they knew how to do this, well, way back in ancient Greece. So, it's a really cool little book, and I highly recommend it to anyone who has a horse, just as, if nothing else, a fun read to kind of, show that, because I think sometimes we have this idea that horses have been mistreated throughout the ages, and just now, we're talking about how saddles fit and stuff, when that's mentioned in here. And not that they had saddles like we have saddles, but they weren't really the same thing. But he does talk about the saddle should be comfortable for the horse. So we kind of, and I think that some of that wisdom was lost for a while, and we're finding it again. And I think that there's this idea that, everyone in the past was terrible to horses, and there were a lot of people that were terrible to horses. But I think most of the time, because horses were how people worked and got around, and if they didn't keep them well, then they couldn't do their job, and then they weren't worth anything. So this idea that people abused their horses just to abuse their horses and work them to death, which I think that did happen for sure, but I think most people didn't treat their horses that way, because their horses were their livelihoods and their way of getting around and communicating, and they were important to them, and so they kept them well because of those things, And and I think that that was more the rule than the exception. Not that there wasn't abuse, but I think in a lot of cases the abuse was the exception. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on the Art of Horsemanship. Really enjoyed it. Give it a quick read, and I will see you all next week with more videos. And have a good weekend.